Sarah Miller, a single mom, sat on a late-night train with her 4-year-old son Tommy. They were heading to Seattle for a fresh start. Sarah felt tired and nervous about the move. The job she had found in Seattle seemed like a big chance, but it also made her anxious. She hoped it would bring a better life for her and Tommy. Tommy was fast asleep beside her. He held his favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunk, close to him. It was the last gift his father had given him before he walked out of their lives 2 years ago. Even though Sarah had tried her best to stay strong, the memories of those painful years still lingered in her mind. The train hummed along the tracks and Sarah looked out the window, lost in her thoughts. She hoped that the new job and a fresh start in Seattle would bring them both a better life. After months of struggling in Chicago, she couldn't help but dream of a brighter future for Tommy. Tommy's peaceful face was a source of comfort for Sarah. She gently squeezed his hand, trying to push away her worries. The promise of a new life was on the horizon, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. Still, there was hope in her heart, and that hope kept her going. Sarah knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to make it work. She had to believe that a new beginning in Seattle would give Tommy the stability he deserved. And so, she held on to that hope as the train carried them into the night. Sarah stood up and quietly walked down the train aisle to the restroom, passing an elderly woman sitting by the window. Her hand trembled slightly as she moved, and she couldn't shake the weight of the last few years. Being a single mother had been hard. Every day felt like a struggle. The memories of those tough times flooded her mind, and she worried if this new change would really make their lives better. When Sarah reached the restroom, she closed the door behind her and leaned over the sink. She splashed cold water on her face, hoping the chill would calm her nerves. The bright lights in the small space made her feel more anxious, and her mind raced with questions. Was she making the right decision? The job offer in Seattle sounded perfect, offering stability and a place to live, but it all seemed too good to be true. Could she trust it? What if it turned out to be another mistake? She thought about Tommy, fast asleep back in their seats. He deserved a better life, but was she doing enough to make sure they'd both be okay? The weight of the unknown was heavy on Sarah's shoulders. She had spent so many nights wondering if she was doing the right thing for her son. Should she take the risk and move, or was she just making another desperate choice? Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened up and wiped her face with a towel. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she had to keep going. For Tommy, she had to believe that this new chance in Seattle would be the change they needed. She just hoped she wasn't making a mistake. When Sarah returned to her seat, she was surprised to see a man sitting next to Tommy. The seat that had been empty when she left was now occupied by a well-dressed man in a charcoal suit. He looked polished and confident, but it was the sight of him sitting so close to Tommy that made Sarah's heart race. Tommy was no longer asleep. He was awake and staring at the man, his eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah's first thought was to protect her son. She had always been careful about who got too close to him, especially since her husband left them 2 years ago. Her protective instincts kicked in, and she felt a wave of unease wash over her. What was this man doing with Tommy? Why was he sitting so close to him? The man seemed to be drawing something on Tommy's airline safety card. His hand moved smoothly across the paper, focused and precise. Sarah could see that Tommy was watching him intently, his little face full of wonder. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She wanted to believe that this man meant no harm, but her worries were too strong to ignore. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice slightly shaky as she approached them. "What are you doing with my son?" The man looked up at her, his expression softening. His eyes were kind, brown, and full of warmth. Sarah was taken aback by how gentle his gaze was. She had expected someone who looked distant or cold, but this man seemed completely different. "I'm sorry if I've startled you," the man said with a calm voice. "My name is James. Your son woke up while you were gone and he seemed a bit anxious. I noticed his elephant, Mr. Trunk, and thought I'd draw something to help calm him down." Sarah's eyes shifted to Tommy. He was watching the man's drawing with fascination. The lines on the safety card were transforming into an image, a teddy bear beautifully drawn with great detail. Tommy's earlier anxiety seemed to have completely disappeared. He smiled up at Sarah, holding out the card for her to see. "Look, Mommy," Tommy exclaimed, his voice full of excitement. Mr. James made Mr. Trunk a new friend. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach loosen slightly. She couldn't deny that the drawing was impressive. It wasn't just a simple sketch. It was a detailed illustration, full of life and character. The teddy bear on the card seemed almost real, as if it was alive, ready to jump off the page. James smiled, seeing the look on Sarah's face. "I hope he likes it," he said softly. I used to draw for my daughter. She loved bears. They were her favorite thing in the world. The mention of his daughter caught Sarah off guard. She noticed the sadness in his eyes as he spoke, a shadow that seemed to hang over him. There was something about the way he spoke that made Sarah feel a strange mix of sympathy and curiosity. She didn't want to pry, but there was clearly a lot more to this man than just a stranger helping her son. Tommy, oblivious to the adult conversation, tugged at James's sleeve. Can you draw another one? Maybe a bear with a balloon? James chuckled and nodded, already reaching for another safety card. I'd love to, he said with a bright smile. How about a bear at a birthday party? Sarah watched as James continued drawing for Tommy, turning simple airline safety cards into a collection of stories. Each bear he drew seemed to have a personality of its own, and Tommy's giggles filled the air as he enjoyed each new creation. As the train rolled on through the night, Sarah felt herself becoming more at ease. The man who had seemed so intimidating at first now appeared to be kind and thoughtful, and the worry that had clouded her mind slowly began to fade. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to James than he was letting on, but for now, all she could do was watch as he brought comfort to her son. James continued to draw, his pencil moving with ease as Tommy watched eagerly. The little boy was clearly enjoying the attention, laughing at each new bear that appeared on the page. Sarah, still standing nearby, felt a sense of calm starting to settle over her. The tension in her chest eased slightly, but she couldn't help but wonder who this man was and why he was being so kind to her son. James looked up from his drawing and noticed Sarah's quiet gaze. He paused for a moment as if sensing her hesitation. I hope he's enjoying the drawings, he said, his voice gentle. He seemed a little nervous when he woke up and I thought something to distract him might help. It's not easy being on a train for so long. Sarah nodded, still unsure whether to fully trust him, but the kindness in his voice put her at ease. She hadn't expected someone so well-dressed and calm to show such attention to Tommy, but something about James made her feel like he was trustworthy. As he finished another drawing of a bear, James turned the safety card around and smiled. I used to do this for my daughter, he said softly. She loved bears. It became our thing. Every time she felt upset, I would draw her a new bear to make her smile. Tommy's face lit up with excitement when he saw the new drawing. Wow. Look, Mommy. It's another bear. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She studied James more carefully, noticing the sadness behind his eyes as he spoke. There was a quiet grief there, something deep and painful that wasn't immediately obvious. She could feel that this wasn't just a random kindness, there was a story behind his actions. She must have been very special, Sarah said, her voice softening as she gazed at Tommy, who was now clutching the safety card with the bear. She understood, more than anyone, what it felt like to have your life change because of a loss. Her own heart had been broken when her husband left, but James had clearly experienced something even more devastating. James's expression faltered for a moment, and his eyes seemed to grow distant. Her name was Lily, he said quietly. She was 4 years old when she passed away from leukemia. I miss her every day. Drawing the bears was something I started doing for her during her treatment. It helped her and it helped me too. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She couldn't imagine the pain James had gone through losing his daughter. Her eyes filled with sympathy, but she also felt a strange sense of connection. In that moment she realized that he wasn't just helping Tommy, he was also helping himself by offering comfort through the bears. Lily loved bears more than anything, James continued, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. Every time I drew one it made her smile. I think, in a way, it helped us both get through the hard days. Sarah's heart ached for him. It was clear that James carried a deep wound, and yet here he was, using his art to bring comfort to a stranger's son. She could see how much he cared not just for his daughter but for Tommy as well. The kindness in James's eyes slowly began to break down Sarah's guard. She had been so focused on her own struggles that she hadn't expected to meet someone else who understood pain and loss so deeply. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a flicker of trust. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, her voice soft. You're very kind. I can see how much Lily meant to you. James gave her a small smile, his eyes still carrying that hint of sadness. It's my pleasure. Drawing has a way of healing for both the person drawing and the one receiving the picture. I hope Tommy enjoys these bears. Sarah watched as Tommy carefully placed the safety cards with the bears into his small backpack. The innocent joy on his face was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures, like a drawing, could make a world of difference. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her as she looked at James. His kindness was not just about the drawings, It was about his willingness to share a piece of himself with her and Tommy. As the train continued on its journey, Sarah couldn't help but feel a little more hopeful. She wasn't sure what would happen in Seattle, but for the first time in a while she felt like maybe they weren't so alone after all. As the hours passed on the train, Tommy became more and more comfortable with James. The man who had once seemed like a stranger now felt like a friend. Each time Tommy asked for a new bear drawing, James was happy to oblige. He quickly became skilled at creating all sorts of bears flying kites, bears playing in the park, and even a bear dressed as a superhero. Tommy was delighted with each new creation, and his laughter filled the air, making Sarah smile for the first time in a while. The drawings seemed to work wonders for Tommy. What had started as a nervous, anxious boy now sat quietly, enjoying the stories James created with his pencil. Sarah couldn't help but be amazed at the magic of it all. James wasn't just drawing for Tommy, he was calming him down and giving him a sense of comfort in an unfamiliar and sometimes scary situation. As Tommy rested his head against the window, holding on to his collection of bear drawings, Sarah took the opportunity to learn more about James. He seemed to be more than just a man passing through on the train, and she found herself curious about his life. "So what do you do?" Sarah asked, trying to start a conversation. She didn't want to feel like she was prying, but she had to know more. James looked at her and smiled faintly. "I'm an architect," he replied. "I work for a firm in Seattle. We're responsible for some of the big projects there, like office buildings, apartments, and commercial spaces." Sarah nodded, impressed. "Sounds like important work. I've always admired architects. It must feel great to be part of something that shapes a city." James's smile faded slightly. "It is, but there's more to it than just the buildings. It's the people behind the projects, the families who will live in those apartments or work in those offices. That's what really matters." Sarah noticed the slight sadness in his voice. It was clear that he wasn't just focused on the physical structures he created, he cared about the lives they would affect. She admired that. But then James grew more serious. "I'm sorry to bring it up," he continued, "but I feel like I should tell you something. I lost my daughter Lily a few years ago. She was only 4 when she passed away from leukemia. My wife couldn't handle it. She left me soon after. It's been hard to move on from that." Sarah's heart went out to him. She couldn't imagine the pain of losing a child, let alone the added heartbreak of a marriage falling apart afterward. She could see the deep pain in James's eyes as he spoke about his daughter, and it made her feel even more connected to him. "I'm really sorry," Sarah said softly. "That must have been so hard." James nodded, his voice quiet. "It still is. But life goes on, right? You have to keep going for the people who are still here." Sarah thought about her own struggles. She had her own fears about the future, especially with the move to Seattle. She had no idea what was waiting for them there. The job offer she'd received seemed perfect, but something about it didn't sit right with her. "I've been feeling the same way," she confessed. "We're heading to Seattle because of a job offer. It promises stability and housing for me and Tommy. But, I don't know. I found it online and it almost feels too good to be true. What if it's a scam?" James's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I know Seattle's development projects very well," he said. "I sit on the planning board there. I can tell you with certainty that there's no boutique hotel being built on Harrison Street like the one your email mentions. The job offer, it doesn't look real." Sarah felt her heart drop. She had hoped it wasn't true, but hearing James's insider knowledge confirmed her worst fears. She felt foolish for even considering it. "So what do I do now?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. James sighed, looking out the window for a moment. "I know it's a tough situation. But you can't trust something that feels too good to be true. It's better to take your time and find something real. I don't want to see you get hurt." Sarah felt a sense of relief hearing his words. Though she didn't have all the answers yet, at least she knew she wasn't alone in this. James's honesty gave her the strength to face whatever came next, and for the first time she felt like maybe everything would work out, just not the way she had planned. As the reality of the situation sank in, Sarah felt her stomach drop. Her mind raced as she thought about everything she had hoped for, moving to Seattle, starting fresh, giving Tommy a better life. All of it was now in jeopardy. James's words echoed in her mind. The job offer she had received, the one that promised stability and a home for her and Tommy, was a scam. Her heart sank even further as she realized she had no backup plan. She had taken a leap of faith, believing that this job could change their lives, but now it seemed like she had made a huge mistake. Without that job, she had no housing, no clear path forward. All her efforts to provide for Tommy and make a better life for them felt like they were unraveling. Her thoughts were interrupted when James spoke again. He looked at her with a soft, sympathetic gaze, his expression filled with understanding. "Sarah, I can see how difficult this is for you," he said gently. "I know how hard it must be to face all of this uncertainty." Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do now. We're already on our way to Seattle, and I thought this job offer was the answer. But now I don't know where to go." James hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Look, I'm not sure if this will help, but my firm owns several apartment buildings in Seattle. There's a small unit available in one of them. It's not much, but it's in a safe neighborhood and it's near good schools. You could stay there for a little while, at least until you figure things out." Sarah stared at him, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. James, a complete stranger, was offering her a place to stay. She knew it was an act of kindness, but it also felt too good to be true. Her instincts told her to be cautious, to turn down such an offer from someone she didn't really know. But as she looked at Tommy, who was still peacefully asleep beside her, she realized that this might be the only opportunity she had left. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose on you. I don't even know you." James gave her a reassuring smile. "You're not imposing. I understand how tough it must be to be in your shoes right now. I've been through my own challenges and I know what it's like to need help when you least expect it. I'm offering this because I want to help and because I can. It's a safe place for you and Tommy to stay while you figure things out." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. She had never been one to rely on others for help, especially not a stranger. But in that moment she also felt a sense of relief. She didn't have any other options, and James's offer felt like a lifeline, a temporary solution in the middle of so much uncertainty. I don't know what to say," Sarah said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But thank you. I don't know how we would have made it without you." James nodded, his expression warm. "It's no trouble at all. Take some time to settle in, and when you're ready, we can help you find something more permanent. Just focus on getting settled first." Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude, but she still felt a small sense of unease. She didn't want to accept help from anyone, especially not a man she had just met. But at that moment, with the weight of her situation pressing down on her, she knew she had no other choice. "Okay," she said softly, her voice steadying. "We'll take you up on your offer." "Thank you." James smiled again, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of her journey after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. The next morning, just as Sarah and Tommy were starting to settle into their new temporary home, things took an unexpected turn. There was a knock at the door, a sound that immediately made Sarah's heart race. She wasn't expecting anyone, and when she opened the door, she was taken aback. Standing there was a woman, mid-30s, with a stern expression on her face. She looked tired, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept in days. The moment Sarah saw her, she felt a wave of tension in the air. "Rachel," James said from behind Sarah, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and something else, maybe discomfort. Rachel's eyes fixed on Sarah, and then on Tommy, who was happily playing in the corner. "James," she said coldly, her voice tight. "I need to speak with you." Sarah stepped aside, feeling uncomfortable as Rachel walked into the apartment without another word. She could tell right away that something wasn't right. Rachel didn't look like someone who was visiting out of kindness. There was a sharpness in her eyes as if she were on edge. Sarah didn't want to get involved in any family drama, but it was hard to ignore the tension that was building. "I need to know what's going on," Rachel continued, turning to James. "You can't just invite strangers into our space. What's with this woman and her son?" James sighed, clearly frustrated. "Rachel, this is Sarah and Tommy. They've fallen on hard times and I offered them a place to stay for a while. They're not strangers." Rachel shook her head, her face hardening. "You've got to be kidding me. After everything we've been through, you're helping some random woman and her kid? You know I don't want people like that around." Sarah could feel the heat rising in the room. The words Rachel spoke weren't just harsh, they were personal. Sarah glanced at Tommy, who was still busy playing, oblivious to the conversation happening around him. She didn't want him to hear the tension building between the two adults. "I know you're grieving, Rachel," James said, his voice softer now. "But this is my choice. I'm trying to help." Rachel's eyes flashed. "Help?" she repeated bitterly. "What are you really doing, James? You're giving away company property to people who don't deserve it. You don't even know them. What if they're taking advantage of you?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known about any company property or that James might be offering anything more than just a place to stay. She'd thought he was offering them shelter out of the goodness of his heart. The mention of company property made it sound more complicated. "I'm not trying to take advantage of anyone," Sarah said, stepping in, her voice steady but filled with concern. I don't have any other options right now." Rachel's eyes turned toward her, cold and calculating. "You think you're the first person who's tried to take advantage of James? Do you know how many people he's helped over the years, only for them to turn on him when they get what they want?" She paused, looking directly at James. "This is why you can't keep doing this, James. You're going to end up getting hurt. Again." James's face tightened as he looked at Rachel. "I don't need you telling me what to do anymore, Rachel. You walked out 2 years ago. I'm not letting you control my life now." Rachel's face went pale at his words. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but then closed it again, swallowing her anger. "You think I'm trying to control you? Fine. But just remember what you're doing here. I'll make sure the board knows what's going on. You're risking everything." The air in the apartment grew heavier with every word, and Sarah could see how much this was hurting James. His past, his struggles with Rachel were all coming to the surface. She could tell that Rachel was still grieving the loss of their daughter, Lily, but her bitterness and anger were making it hard for her to move forward. "I'll handle this," James said, his voice firm. "But don't threaten me, Rachel. You've already taken enough." As Rachel turned and stormed out, Sarah felt a pit in her stomach. She didn't know the whole story, but she could see that Rachel was still holding on to a lot of pain, and it was making her lash out at the people around her. James stood there in silence for a moment, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his past. Sarah didn't know what to say. She felt for James and what he had gone through, but now, with Rachel's words still lingering in the air, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of complications they were stepping into. Would Rachel really cause problems for them? Would James's offer to help them come back to haunt him? Over the next few days, things began to change for Sarah and Tommy. The tension from Rachel's visit slowly started to fade, and Sarah noticed a difference in the way she and James interacted. What had begun as a simple, kind gesture on James's part, offering them a place to stay, was turning into something more meaningful. As Tommy continued to ask for more bear drawings, James seemed to open up more, and Sarah could feel the emotional walls between them starting to lower. Tommy, with his innocent compassion, played a big part in this. Every time James drew a new bear, Tommy's eyes lit up with excitement. His laughter filled the apartment, creating a sense of warmth that made it feel like home. The bears became a symbol of something more than just drawings. They were healing for both Tommy and James. It was as if these simple pictures were stitching up the wounds they had been carrying for so long. Sarah began to notice small changes in James. He no longer seemed as distant or weighed down by his past. When he smiled, it felt more genuine, and his eyes, which had once been filled with sadness, seemed a little lighter. He started to talk more about his daughter Lily, but this time, it wasn't with the same overwhelming grief. He spoke about her with a kind of fondness that showed he was starting to heal, not just for himself but for her memory as well. One evening, as Sarah and Tommy sat on the couch, looking at all the bear drawings James had made, Sarah turned to him with a soft smile. "You know, these drawings, they've helped Tommy so much," she said quietly. "And me too. I never expected something so small could make such a big difference." James looked at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I didn't expect it either," he admitted. "But sometimes healing comes in unexpected ways. Drawing for Tommy has been good for me. It's like I'm not just helping him, I'm helping myself too." As the days passed, Rachel's presence in their lives slowly started to shift as well. After her initial anger and bitterness, she started to show up less often. However, one day she came to the apartment unannounced. Sarah felt a nervous knot in her stomach, unsure of what to expect. But this time, when Rachel walked in, her eyes were different. She didn't look angry, and there was no bitterness in her gaze. Instead, she looked tired, worn out, as though she had been carrying something heavy for far too long. "James," Rachel said, her voice softer than before. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. About helping people." James looked at her, his face unreadable. "Rachel, I don't want to argue. I just wanted to help." "I know," Rachel replied quietly. "And I've been angry. I've been angry for a long time. But seeing what you've done for Sarah and Tommy, it's made me realize that maybe I've been too focused on my own grief." She paused, looking down at the floor before continuing. "I've always tried to keep everything inside, thinking I could handle it on my own. But maybe I need to let go of some of that anger. For Lily. For me." Sarah watched, surprised as Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She had never seen her like this before. It was as if a part of her was finally starting to heal. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered. "I've been so wrapped up in my own pain, I didn't see what was right in front of me." James stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Rachel. You don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore." That moment was quiet but powerful. Rachel's heart, which had been hardened by grief, was beginning to soften. The healing power of art, of the bears James had drawn, had reached her too. She wasn't fully healed, but for the first time she understood that healing didn't have to come all at once. It came in small steps, one at a time. Sarah and Tommy, James and Rachel, were all learning to heal in their own ways. The journey was far from over, but there was hope now. There was warmth, there was kindness, and there was a feeling of new beginnings. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Tommy began to settle into their new life in Seattle. The city, which had once felt so overwhelming and unknown, was slowly becoming home. Sarah had managed to secure a job at a local cafe, a position that, while not perfect, gave her a steady income and the peace of mind she had been craving. Tommy, on the other hand, was thriving in his new preschool. He made friends quickly and was excited to go to school each day, showing Sarah that they were making the right choice by coming here. Sarah often thought back to the days when they had been uncertain about everything. The fear of the unknown, the worry about finding a place to live, and the doubt about whether they could make it on their own. But now, as she watched Tommy play outside in the park across from their apartment, laughing with his new friends, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had made it. They had found stability in the midst of all the chaos. James too was adjusting. After the difficult confrontation with Rachel, things between them had begun to settle. Rachel had started to attend therapy, and although it wasn't easy, she was beginning to open up and deal with the grief that had held her captive for so long. James had been patient, offering her support without trying to force anything. It wasn't always smooth, but there were moments of real connection between them, small conversations about Lily, about their memories, and even about the future. Slowly, Rachel was starting to heal. It wasn't just James and Rachel who were finding peace. The bond between Sarah, Tommy, and James continued to grow. They spent time together on weekends, taking walks through the city, visiting parks, and sharing meals. There was a quiet understanding between them, a sense that they were all in this together. They had become more than just temporary housemates or strangers. They had become a community, a family built on shared experiences, kindness, and the desire to heal. Sarah couldn't help but feel thankful for everything that had happened. If someone had told her a few months ago that she and Tommy would end up in Seattle, living in a small apartment and starting a new life, she would have never believed it. But now, with each passing day, she saw how the pieces were falling into place. They had faced struggles, yes, but those struggles had led them to a new understanding of what home really meant. As Sarah stood by the window one evening, looking out at the city skyline as the sun set behind the buildings, she realized something important. Home wasn't just about the apartment, the job, or the new city they lived in. Home was about the people you shared your life with, the ones who supported you, loved you, and helped you through your hardest times. Sarah and Tommy had found a home in each other, and in James and Rachel too. They had found something even more precious than a roof over their heads. They had found love, hope, and a sense of belonging. Sarah smiled to herself, feeling a warmth in her chest. The hardest journeys, she now realized, often lead to the most beautiful destinations. The pain, the uncertainty, and the struggles had brought them to this moment, a moment where they could finally breathe knowing they had each other. They had truly found home, not in the walls of the apartment, but in the hearts of the people around them. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a sense of peace.